sexy, yeah.
Yeah, exactly, right. So,
Yeah,
you know, we want to kind of keep it fresh and just, you know, keep it open to everything. So, are you good here, by the way? Okay, cool. Sweet. I got a whole bunch of stickers and free stuff here. Feel free to grab some swag when you leave here. We got these sweet PHP Vegas stickers, which, like I mentioned, we used to be called PHP Vegas. I'll get new stickers eventually that says Vegas Programmers. But shout out to the whole, you know, Tech Alley Council and everything for putting this together. You know, really without them, we wouldn't be meeting again in person. Unfortunately, a lot of venues that used to host meetups just haven't opened. So when Tech Alley said, hey, we're opening back up, we jumped on the occasion. So we've been going strong here. I think this is probably the 7th Tech Alley or something that's happened. So, you know, definitely it's not easy leading it. So if you see Josh or Liz or anyone, give them a high five and stuff like that, because it's awesome what they're doing. So tonight we got a bunch of cool stuff that's going on. One, we're going to be having an awesome talk from Cody Moss here. He is basically a wizard of all things at Slickdeals, and I've used to work with him. Awesome developer. And tonight he's going to be talking about converting your, you know, bare metal server sort of thing into a Kubernetes scalable setup. So I'm excited to hear about it. I'm still kind of a noob when it comes to Kubernetes. I use Docker, but just Kubernetes in general, it's still a little bit of a mystery to me. So I'm excited to hear about that. At the end of the meetup, we will be giving away 2 prizes. We'll be giving away a 1-year license to any IDE with JetBrains. So that includes IntelliJ, RubyMine, PyCharm, PHP Storm, whatever programming language you code in, there's an IDE they have for it. It's a huge value, so we'll be giving that away, as well as a 1-month membership to Symphony Casts. They're like kind of Udemy. They teach everything about JavaScript and PHP. So you'll learn all kinds of great stuff. They give you access to their videos and all kinds of awesome content. If we have time, I believe, who here has does anybody have anything they'd like to demo, a startup or something they're working on, or any questions or anything like that? No? Okay. I'll ping Josh, because there was supposed to be one person that was they made an app and they want to talk about it. But we'll see if we have time. Yeah, so we'll hand it off to you, Cody, and let's do some Kubernetes-ing.
Well, hey guys. So this is App Server to Kubernetes, the Great Migration. This is pretty much a talk about my experience with Kubernetes back from when I started with just a bunch of small little single board computers, all the way up to where I implemented it and deployed it for my current place of work, which is Slickdeals. So just some things. If you want to get in contact with me, you can find me at any of these places. Twitter, Discord. I'm also available on the PHP Vegas Slack. I used to be a software engineer, but then I went to the SRE realm, and now I kind of do everything DevOps. And I've been working in software for over a decade, and then I just kind of love automating everything, and that's kind of how I got started with Kubernetes, because I was trying to figure out how do I automate the deployment of my containers to a series of boxes without me having to like cycle through each box. And I've also been using Kubernetes since 2015. It actually came out in 2014, so I'm about a year late, but yeah. So the scenario is, here's a picture of my single board computers. These are 4 ROC 64 boards. They are a ARM 64 architecture, and they have about 4 gigs of memory each. Now that doesn't sound like a whole lot, but when you're running just like little personal workloads, it could actually be expanded quite a bit. Not to mention, the power of Kubernetes is if I ever ran out of space, I could just add more nodes. Okay, so what is Kubernetes? So Kubernetes was started by Google. They were developing it in-house. They don't actually give a whole lot of detail about before the days they open sourced it back in 2014. It is now under the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, so it's not owned purely by Google anymore, although they are still the biggest contributor to it. Although there is now Microsoft and Oracle, and there's a bunch of other companies that are now backing Kubernetes as well, and it has become quite the cornerstone of the CNCF landscape. Almost everything is installable on Kubernetes in that landscape, and you can also make almost anything run on Kubernetes as well. My favorite distro is created by Rancher. It's called K3S, and it's really small. The whole joke is they removed like all 5 characters out of the 8 for Kubernetes. That's where they got their name K3S. It's just supposed to be lightweight. Also, Kubernetes runs everything as pods, which is technically can be 1 or more containers. So when you're thinking of like deploying your Docker container, you usually think of like you're only deploying the 1 container. But in this case, you can actually deploy a pod, which could consist of many. I actually have not seen past like 5 containers in one image, but I have heard of tales where people made their pods like 20 plus containers, which is a huge workload, and I wouldn't recommend it unless your servers are absolutely huge. Okay. So, the first scenario is, I was running Pihold. I've been running Pihold for many years now on my home network. It is a network-wide ad block. It's a DNS server, DHCP, so you can actually set it up so that whenever devices join your network, they automatically get a new domain name service or a new domain on your setup. It works on 32-bit and 64-bit, all top architectures. There was no Helm chart at the time, but Mojo 2600, he is a champ and has actually made a community available Helm chart, although I still have not migrated to it, but I've heard great things. So if you do want to repeat this, yes.
Okay. So how does this play nice with your router? Do you have to like turn off DHCP on your router and then point this gateway at it or something?
Okay, yeah, so this is for Pihold, yeah. You would turn off the DHCP on your router, and since it just exists on your network, when the device makes a DHCP broadcast and says, hey, I need an IP address, Pihold will respond. Your router shouldn't because you turned it off. If you have both of them on, you're gonna get some fuzzy results.
Okay.
But you can configure it so you have like mine that I use at home is bluemossmedia.home. You can actually find my website at bluemossmedia.com, which is just my blog. It hasn't been updated in a while, mostly because I'm not looking for a job right now. But if you ever see blog posts start flying up, you know I'm looking. Yeah, so when you put that base in there, when any device comes on, its host name gets attached to the front, so it will be hostname.bluemossmedia.home. And so since I also set it to be my DNS server for my home network as well, everything just pops up. It's pretty cool. But anyway, this is a talk about Kubernetes and how I deployed it on it, not so much about Pihold. Okay. Although I will answer any questions you have about Pihold. Yeah. Okay. So the first thing is I had to figure out how the hell do I deploy it, because this was when I started my endeavor, and I was just like playing with the Minikube, and I was trying to figure it all out. At this time, I had to compile everything from source, because there was no distribution. Although K3S shortly came out after I started moving to SBCs, single board computer. And so the big thing is deployments. Now this is a controller type inside of Kubernetes that will deploy a pod and will keep it alive. So if the pod just happens to die, it will say, oh, I see that a pod I'm managing is no longer available, let me spin up another one. Now the idea is like, it will manage that one pod, but you can also set it to set replicas. And it will set up what's called a replica set in the background, and it will spin up more pods according to that replica. But they will all be exact mirrors of each other. And so like that was one of the big things you have to watch out for when you're trying to get into persistent volumes and persistent volume claims. Deployments might not be the best situation for you for all software, but in this case, Pihold, I want exact mirrors of multiple DNS servers because this way it's also solving my syncing problem. Because as long as I gave a persistent volume behind it, they all are derived from the same data and the same configuration files. So no matter which one, no matter which pod I hit, they will get the same information. And in this way, I also limit myself from specific node downtime. Because Kubernetes will make sure that it has like pods running across your nodes, and it will make sure that if that node goes down, it will just spin up another replica of a pod, but your servers won't be down because you have multiple pods across other hosts already. At least you should. And also, 90% of apps will use a deployment type instead of a stateful set because Kubernetes for a long time it was kind of bad practice to actually have persistent storage behind it. But now that is changed within like the last 2 years. Now I have deployment, which Pihold is running in a pod. But now how do I access it from the outside world? Most CNIs will actually prevent you from getting in, most CNIs, which is a container network interface, will actually prevent you from getting into a pod unless it actually has like an external facing IP address, which is how Amazon's EKS does it. They actually have what's called their elastic CNI, and that one, all your pods actually get IP addresses that you can just hit straight from your load balancer. You don't actually have to do a service or anything. But in this case, since I was running K3S, and it does a CNI that's based completely off of IP tables on the local hosts, I have to be able to expose it. So this is where services come into play. So services actually have a few types. There's node port, there's load balancer, there's cluster IP, and then there's external name. External name, I'm going to be honest, I just heard about it the other day when I was whipping up this talk. I actually have not played with it yet. So if any of you get interested in it enough and start toying with it, feel free to hit me up on Twitter or on Discord because I would love to hear your stories. But anyway, so node port is like, I would specify that port like 308080 is going to go to port 80 on this specific pod. And then what it does is it will open up a port on every node at 308080. And if I hit that port on any one of them, it will be networked through Kubernetes and go straight to that pod, which is pretty cool. Services also will act as load balancers. So when they spin up pods, when you have multiple pods, how do you load balance within them? Well, Kubernetes kind of already solves that for you with the service definitions. It will automatically just load balance it. Now, the type of load balancer, that one is mostly for cloud. It's not really for on-prem, although there is some projects that are pretty cool that will do some VRRP magic behind the scenes, and they will grab a, like you can kind of do a DHCP, or you can just say, hey, within this list of domain, or within this list of IPs, feel free to grab any one of them, because I have designated that for your space. Which is Metal LB is a good one. And then there's Service LB, which is a little different. That one's also from the team at Rancher. That one, just any one of your nodes will be the load balancer IP, and it will automatically switch on you too. So make sure that you set up dynamic DNS for that one. But for Metal LB, it will take that IP and it will attach it to a node. And then if that node ever goes down, the VRRP protocol will fail, and it will drop out, and then it will go to, yeah, sorry for the echo. Then it will go into the, what do you call it? It will go to another node because they're all trying to keep that IP alive. And then if you were to hit that IP address, again, it gets routed through the IP tables, and it will hit straight to the pod. Yes?
How does it know which one to hit behind it? Is it just like a load-based thing, like it kind of is keeping track of what it sent earlier? Or is it like a latency thing? Or is it just a round robin thing, or can you configure that, I guess?
You can configure that. That's going to be dependent solely on which cloud you are on. But if you're on-prem, it will matter which implementation you install. So for MetalLB, I know that it will do round robin, but you can configure it through annotations to say least connected or other various strategies.
Okay.
Yeah, but that's all going to be based solely off of your implementation of which load balancer you have. In this case, I'm going to say if you're just starting out, stick with node port and cluster IP because those are going to be the most important ones for when you're first starting out.
And as far as external name, is that like an internal host name or actually like a domain name?
It's actually a domain name, so if any of the pods resolve for that domain name, it would then resolve to the pod.
Okay.
That's why I haven't toyed with it much. I don't exactly know how it works, but I saw it and it kind of piqued my interest. And then cluster IP is it just it doesn't expose the pod at all. It just gives the service an IP that will stay static amongst all the pods. So as the pods die and come alive, they keep the same cluster IP. Now where that's important is with Ingress, which I believe, nope, I cover load balancers. Yeah, so we'll actually be covering Ingress controllers here shortly. Okay, so load balancers, kind of already talked about MetalLB and Service LB from Rancher. And then the reason why I chose to use MetalLB for Pihold is because port 53 is pretty standard for DNS, and it tends to act like if you're running Debian, they actually will spin up and bind to port 53 for their local DNS, and it could be troublesome to try to swap that out the host. I've actually run into a slew of problems with it when I was trying to get Pihold running in Kubernetes, but just save yourself some time, use MetalLB, install it against your cluster. It'll save you a lot of time because it gets its own network interface and binds port 53 to that network interface and not the system's network interface, not the host's network interface. Also, cloud companies, just using certain annotations, you can actually tell it, hey, I want an external LB to have this WAF in front of it and all this other stuff, and it'll just automatically, AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, they all work like that. They just automatically spin up a load balancer pointing at your pods. It's magic. So if you can, do this in the cloud. It's great. Okay, so as I said earlier, Pihold is, I had to make sure that I had a persistent volume behind it, persistent volume backing it. Because I wanted to make it so that if you hit pod 1 or pod 2, it didn't matter, because they should have the same synced information. Now, there's a slew of storage classes out there, or persistent volume controllers, that will work against like pretty much anything. You can have it work with S3, Gluster, NFS. If it exists, it's out there. So just pick whichever flavor you're most familiar with, install that storage class, and then you can start making persistent volume claims against it. Or if you want something a little bit more resilient, you're going to want to spin up a persistent volume with specific settings to say, actually, do like never delete this volume, or maybe delete it if like I say to uninstall. There's a bunch of configuration there that only goes into persistent volumes. But if you just want something quick and dirty, you're testing something, or maybe this is just your home setup and you're able to have downtime, you can make persistent volume claims straight against the storage class, and it will spin up a persistent volume against your, or not against, but it will actually attach them to your deployment pods. And actually where you mount that is all in the deployment configuration, but the persistent volume claim is a separate object you're going to make that says, hey, create this thing.
Is that
Yes.
like an NFS sort of mount?
It could be NFS.
Okay, so it's just configurable basically.
Yeah, it's the storage class is what does all the translating. So when a pod comes up and says, hey, I have this persistent volume, I need to mount it, and it goes to the storage class and says, hey, how do I mount this? And then the storage class goes, here's all the information you need to mount the volume you are requesting. And then this also works because if a pod dies and then comes back up on another node or comes back up on the same node, it will make sure to mount that exact same volume at the exact same location every time. Yeah. So I know I've kind of talked about Helm charts quite a bit already, but what Helm charts are is they are just installable packages, and they're just pretty much just YAML template chart, or they're YAML templates that swap out information for your deployment or for your state, for any of your Kubernetes objects with whatever variables you want to set. And you can set all of this via the CLI, or you can make your own values.yaml for specific deployments, such as your production, your staging, your tests. They can all have different settings. In this case, you can see that in staging and production, we wanted 3 deployments, but in tests, we only wanted 1 replica. And that's, you can make that as configurable as you want in Helm, because at the end of the day, it's just Go templating on a YAML file. The current competitor, though, that's kind of becoming interesting is Customize, and what that does is it takes like already built Kubernetes spec files and allows you to write patches against it. So I could say, actually, for this deployment, I want to run this patch against it that's going to change just the replica or some of the other information, such as labels. And it also has some nice helper functions as well. If you aren't sure which one to go with, I would say Helm, because it is by far the community favorite. But Customize is definitely out. It's definitely getting up there quite a bit, mostly because it's actually developed by the Kubernetes special interest groups. They are the ones who are backing it. So it's the same people who are building Kubernetes are building the current competitor. Okay, so that was Pihold. And at this point in time, Pihold was a deployment with a service that mounted to a load balancer and had persistent volumes. Those were the 4 things I actually had to like get down in the nitty-gritty and learn through in order to know how to deploy Pihold. But now it's like you could just go and grab Mojo's chart, plug in the persistent volume information you want, and then plug in a bunch of the others, and then boom, there you go. Now, another service I use quite a bit for my internal home setups is GetT. This is where I put projects I'm not sure are actually going to work out before they hit GitHub, or ones that are just very rough alpha-y before I put them up on GitHub. But almost all my code eventually ends up on GitHub. So this is primarily just a testing environment, which is why I made some of the decisions I did, such as using SQLite instead of MySQL. That's coming in through a persistent volume on the pod, and then from there it's configured using their Helm chart. And they support ARM64 and all of the TARP architectures. Now, why did I point out ARM64 instead of just saying 32-bit and 64-bit like I did Pihold? This is where, if you're trying to do this on Raspberry Pis, it's going to come to bite you if you try to install GetT, because Raspbian, right now, the stable released version is ARM30. Even though they have ARM 64-bit processors, they are bringing it down to ARM32. Now, you can also go out and grab the experimental Raspbian, and that will get you up to ARM64, but I hope you have a Pi 4 with at least 4 gigs of memory, because if you're trying to do this on a Pi 3 with the 1 gig, you're going to run into some really strange issues. But yeah. Code and database, there we go. So this is where Ingress and controllers come into play. So there's the Ingress objects that you're going to configure that say, hey, at this host name or at this path, I want you to route to this service. But notice I said service and not pod. This is where the cluster IP setting on a service comes into play. Because what happens is the service will have a cluster IP, so no matter what happens with the pods, they're always going to end up attached to that same service. And then Ingress, I'm going to say, hey, if you get to this path or this port or this host name, just send it to the pods. Now, how this works is you have what's called an Ingress Controller. Now, almost every big name load balancer out there, load balancer people, teams, have an Ingress Controller. Back when I started this, there was only the one, and it was in beta. It actually just went stable like a couple months back. But it was in beta when I started, and it was Nginx. And that was also being developed by the Kubernetes Special Interest Group. Now there's a couple caveats, or well, there's no, I wouldn't actually call them caveats, but yeah, it's you can bind to a path, port, hostname. The controller is just constantly looking at the services, and it's monitoring it, and as the service configuration changes, it's going to change the Nginx configuration at checkpoints. So if your if like all your pods go down and then and then new ones come up at a really rapid pace, you may see like a few seconds of downtime, but it does eventually catch up. Now, if you're part of the now PHP, or actually I think there's like a lot of them out there, you can actually configure the Ingress Controller to actually be your FCGI like front end. So you can, so instead of like bundling an Nginx pod with your PHP pod, you can actually just tell the Ingress Controller, hey, I'm actually going to configure you to work as a FCGI, and just call port 9000 on my pods to render the PHP file. Oh, and when you're spinning up your Ingress Controller, it's going to have an external facing IP through a load balancer or through a special port on your nodes via node port. Yes.
Have you ever used Traffic?
Yeah.
Is that like similar to what you're talking about, like using Nginx? You also use Traffic for the load balancer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. K3S actually comes with traffic out of the box. I mostly disable it because I'm more familiar with Nginx and the Nginx annotations, although traffic does work pretty great. It forces you to use SSL right off the bat, so it's more secure actually. Okay, so one of the things is with GetT, their community chart, they decided to use a stateful set. Now there's a couple reasons why you would want to use a stateful set versus a deployment. In my example, I'm using Elasticsearch. So what a stateful set is it does like a persistent volume and a persistent volume claim kind of in the background, kind of like how deployment uses replica sets in the background, so you don't have to configure those manually. With a stateful set, you can usually throw in all of the persistent volume information you want, and it will spin up in the background a persistent volume and a persistent volume claim, and then it will actually attach to the pods it generates. And the stateful set works exactly like deployments, except every pod is different in very small ways, such as you can point out a specific what configuration, so like Elasticsearch, you need to have your nodes have different names, so that way you can differentiate them from each other. So you would have node 1, node 2, node 3, could be their names, or some other kind of repeating value. And then they will also all have a separate setup of their own persistent volume. So if I were to spin up 3 Elasticsearch nodes, I would get 3 persistent volume claims against my storage. So you would see 3 different volumes, but that's because you wanted it to have like syncing and all the other stuff that it does. And also maybe if you're using like a certain backend like Ceph or Gluster, you don't have to worry about that being on one node either, because it would, separate out the volumes. And so if you did happen to have some catastrophic failure, you knew that your data was pretty much safe because you were distributing it both in the Kubernetes pods, but you were also distributing it amongst your own storage cluster. Okay. Any questions so far? I know I've thrown out a lot of information.
So the Ingress control the rules, and it's still, and the load balance we're gonna do this. So it's separated entities. Usually you can do both with a normal load balance. On Kubernetes to be separated.
Yes, you could do both. You can actually set up where the same set of pods would have a separate service, because services just work off tags. So if I really wanted, I could actually have the same set of pods have an Ingress Controller and a load balancer, or I could do where it's just the Ingress Controller has the load balancer, and then the Ingress will then route to the pods.
So the Ingress can have the load.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
And then since Ingress just hits a service, the service will load balance your pods too, based on your annotations of configuration. So it's kind of like load balancer behind load balancer, but you're distributing the load. So I haven't actually seen any real huge performance hits though with that kind of setup. Okay, so now the big thing that kind of came up when my boss was asking me, how do I monitor this? Because at the end of the day, it's cool to have a Kubernetes cluster, it's cool to have your deployments up, but do you know how much CPU is being used? How much memory, network? Do you know if like a pod's being throttled because maybe it's the only pod? No. This is where Prometheus and the Kubernetes stack Helm chart come into play. So Kubernetes, the Helm chart, the stack Helm chart, it does a bunch of glorious things for you. One, it automatically spins up all the node exporters as a Damon set across all of the nodes, so you get all of the CPU memory on the host. But it also opens it up so you can start gathering metrics on a per pod and per container basis. That requires a little bit more configuration, but in the long run, it's well worth it. And I realize I have some strange capitalization on this slide. But also, it sets up Grafana for you automatically, so you can just go to like, whatever domain you decided to set on the Ingress or on whatever node port, because that's all configurable in the values. And then you would just go to their Grafana, and it would automatically have a bunch of dashboards showing you a bunch of stuff about the hosts and certain pods. And it does come with some pod tracking out of the box, but it's not as refined as like getting down to the container level. It also comes with Alert Manager. If you haven't heard of it, it's just pretty much like, you could say if something's within a certain definition of different, then alert me. Because maybe, at 2 a.m., when my traffic is low, I want that to be normal. But if at 2 a.m., all of a sudden I'm starting to get like, 100% CPU, that's a little weird. Like, alert me on that, because I bet there's probably a bad actor there. Oh, and also, one of the cool things is since it comes with the Prometheus operator, you can actually spin up more Prometheus instances to be able to monitor things outside of your cluster too. Like you don't actually, like you could spin up as many Prometheus as you want. So like if you wanted to set it up on like a per team or maybe per application basis, you could totally do that. Or you could just funnel it all into the same Prometheus. It don't care. It's really how do you want to structure your data, and also what performance hits do you see when you're saving a bunch of metrics to Prometheus. So, kind of touched on Damon Sets. These are just another Kubernetes object type. Again, another YAML file that you have to add to your Helm chart. Or in this case, since it comes with the Kubernetes stack, it automatically does it for you. It's just it's a deployment, but it happens on every node. It makes sure that there's one on every node. So that way it's always up, it's always available, and it's always, like some people use this to monitor specific things on specific hosts, like such as logging with FluentD, or Prometheus with the node exporter, or maybe you're just doing this just to make sure that you're, like in this case, I run Rancher at Slickdeals, and when we run Rancher runs as a Damon set, so that way the small Kubernetes cluster I spun up to make sure the Rancher stayed up, it's a very small cluster, it's like 5 nodes, and it just does a Damon set to keep all the pods up. And that way Rancher never goes down, and I never have to hear about how nobody could hit it. Oh, okay, so now we're going to be getting into some nitty gritty here for a little bit. But yeah, so there's custom resource definitions. As I'm sure you heard earlier, I said you could spin up more Prometheus. And how it does it is there is a Prometheus kind that gets added when you add the Prometheus operator. They actually add a custom resource definition, and all that is it just says this is what a resource can look like. Here's what parameters I require. Here's what parameters are optional, and that way it tells the Kubernetes API, okay, you're going to have a new endpoint that's going to monitor a new set of objects you're not going to necessarily know what to do with, but please just store the data in etcd for somebody who does. And this can trigger a lot of outcomes. Also, if you're doing this with Helm, it can sometimes be a pain, because when you install with Helm, they will install the CRDs, but if you need to upgrade them, you have to uninstall them and then have Helm reinstall them. And because Helm will not remove them, because that could be a huge breaking change to your cluster. So if you're dealing with CRDs, yeah, just make sure you plan for when you're doing the upgrade, to do it in the off hours whenever your application is least used, because you will experience some downtime. Okay, so controllers and operators. So we already covered the Prometheus operator, but what the Prometheus operator does is it uses a CRD called Prometheus, and that Prometheus just says, this is how I want you to spin up a Prometheus node, here's what configuration goes into it, and here's what I want you to monitor, because Prometheus reaches out for metrics instead of things sending metrics to Prometheus. So in this case, we tell it, like, here is where I want you to hit, or here's how I want you to scrape pods, or scrape pod or service metric CRDs, because there's a bunch of CRDs that come with it. And what an operator does is an operator uses that CRD to know how to spin up a workload. Just like how deployments know how to spin up a pod, the Prometheus operator uses the Prometheus kind to know how to make a deployment or make a stateful set that will then put Prometheus inside of it. And it's basically a way of automating Kubernetes workloads inside of the cluster. And then controllers are they work a lot like operators, but they are they are drastically more simple. Because usually they are all about just spinning up the workload and then forgetting about it. Because all they wanted to do was just, like, there's a vault controller one which will take a secret out of HashiCorp Vault and it will make a Kubernetes secret for you. So that way it can be accessible from inside of your Kubernetes cluster. And that, it just goes and it takes the secret and shoves it into another secret. And then every once in a while, it might check back and see that the secret changed and then resave the secret. But yeah, that's just controllers and operators. Okay, so how did I translate this to my job? Because like that was one of the things, right? Is like I could talk, like when I was talking with my boss, we had an interest in Kubernetes, but we weren't exactly sure how to go about it. And I then pointed out, like, hey, I've actually, for like the last 4 years, I've been running Kubernetes on a set of Raspberry Pis. How much harder could it be for my production workload? Well, it's surprisingly the knowledge transfers really well, because if Kubernetes works on, like if you have a Kubernetes cluster set up on-prem or in the cloud or even on your own Raspberry Pis, as long as it actually has all the same Ingress controllers, the same CNI, basically if you set them up all the same, your Helm charts will work exactly the same. It's just now, instead of saying replicas 2 on my Raspberry Pis, I'm saying replicas 6 or 20, depending on the workload. It's just, add more. You want bigger nodes. You want to make sure that your routers, your switches, basically all that has more bandwidth. And also, load balancers become very fun because you're probably not going to install Metal LB or Service LB at work. You're probably going to have like a dedicated box that's connected straight to the internet that is, HA proxy or something else. So at that point, what's going to end up happening is there's going to be some manual configuration that has to be done there, and you're not just going to have the nice spin up. Or maybe you guys take the gamble and you actually do install Metal LB and you just have that attached right to one of your public IDs. That could work. RKE is the distribution that I'm more familiar with, and it's built by Rancher. Rancher's a big name in this space. If you haven't heard of them, you should definitely go look them up because they have a lot of great products and some that are up and coming that are very interesting. But they have this Kubernetes distribution called RKE, which is just Rancher Kubernetes Enterprise. It doesn't come with a whole lot installed. It comes with Nginx Ingress comes installed by default because that one they have seen that it can handle production workloads more easily, although traffic is becoming one of their newest favorites that they've seen from K3S, so that might change in the future. Also, you're going to have to write some automated configuration as code to set up new nodes, right? So you get your Ansibles, your chefs, other stuff ready, because at the end of the day, you don't want to have to explain to every person who ever wants to spin up a Kubernetes node exactly how to do it. It's just better to have it in code, have it in a pipeline, and just be like, yeah, just if you spin up a new VM and then go smash this cookbook against it, you're going to have a Kubernetes node, right? And then also, something I learned from doing this at my day job is use VMs, don't use bare metal boxes. Or if you do use bare metal boxes, make sure they aren't absolutely huge, because Kubernetes has this application in it called Kubelet that manages all the pods on that node. And Kubelet has this 101 pod limit. It's just, after it reaches 101 pods, it will not spin up any more workloads on that node. So there's actually a chance that if you have this huge box, but you're only, spinning up like PHP applications that are using, maybe you're configuring the pod to only use like 512 meg memory and like a CPU, you're gonna grossly have wasted CPU and memory on that server. So I've actually discovered that VMs are your best bet. Just take those bare metal boxes, throw a hypervisor on them, spin up a bunch of VMs that are more realistic with what your workloads are going to look like. Now, recently, the company I work for, we were kind of just only on-prem, but we've since added where we're now doing this hybrid thing, and it's interesting. But part of it is, now how do I make this work in the cloud? This is where I actually learned a lot about the annotations. So a lot of this stuff is automatically done for you. If you need a load balancer, throw an annotation on it, load balancer spins up, you can magically hit your pods. Storage classes, again, instead of having to install a storage class, you're just going to say, hey, default storage class, give me space, and then depending on the cloud, it will give you space. So like AWS uses their Elastic Block Store, it attaches an EBS volume to the host, and it will actually move that EBS volume. But there's also a way to tell it to use S3, which it will then just use a fuse driver to mount it. By the way, that can be slow. I wouldn't recommend it. It's great for if you're offloading just log data and don't really care about the speed of that. But also, what's really cool about this is when I built the first set of Kubernetes clusters on-prem, it took us days, weeks, months of research and getting everything ready to say, hey, okay, cluster's ready for production workloads. And now anytime we spin up new ones, we have all the pipelines in place, but it's still, a day or two because it's on-prem. But in the cloud, I could literally say, hey, Terraform, go spin me up EKS, and then, yes.
Were you also using Terraform on-prem?
In places, yes. Unfortunately, it doesn't work in all of the places, so yeah. But still, in the cloud, you just say, Terraform, go make me EKS. And then 20 minutes later, you have a cluster. Now, it actually does take 20 minutes in AWS because they spin up all the master nodes, all the control plane, away. It's not actually in your VPC. They then do some kind of peering so that the worker nodes that do exist in your VPC can get to the control plane, and the control plane can get to them. And then after that, you just hit the EKS API to deploy your Helm charts or anything like that. But that's pretty much all it came down to. Also, auto-scaling node groups, they're magic, because, you know, on-prem, I actually have to go and say, hey, here's like 30 new VMs, join the Kubernetes cluster. In this case, I can just say, hey, if you start seeing a load that's like 80%, maybe spin up an extra. IAC is infrastructure as code. Yeah. And like, it all becomes configurable inside the Kubernetes cluster.
Like as far as hybrid cloud, is it wise to actually split up a single application between multiple providers, or is it just that you're saying maybe one microservice lives over here and there's a database that's in AWS, and then you have another microservice in your bare metal with a database behind it there? Because I find that there would be security issues with like trying to get the database to replicate across, right?
Yep.
Sounds like you already, okay.
Yep.
So
I highly just recommend the second path you said, where it's just, you have microservice up in the cloud, microservice on-prem, and then they just talk over an API.
okay.
Because in that way you can use firewall ruling and stuff like that, and you don't have to worry about the data transporting quickly enough. Oh, and I forgot to do that. I've been going to fix this slide, and it's going to have a link to my greenhouse link. By the way, I do get a kickback from Slickdeals. If you want to come and start deploying workloads on Kubernetes, we have developer positions. I know we have SRE positions coming up eventually in the future. I'm not privy to all that information, but you know, you can keep an eye on that greenhouse link if you want to work at Slickdeals. And any questions? Yeah.
Were you guys always Kubernetes, or were you Docker before? This is going to lead to another question.
Yeah, so we were spinning up Kubernetes in places, or I mean not Kubernetes, Docker in places. And so it was, we were spinning up VMs and then running Docker on it. But then we were kind of like, okay, now how do we make this more deployable, more scalable? And that's when the Kubernetes talk.
Did you go straight from Docker to Kubernetes, or did you go with like Docker Swarm to Kubernetes?
We went Docker to Kubernetes.
Okay.
Our architecture team, they did play with Docker Swarm a bit, just on a couple test boxes. But my team, we were like, there's really no competition, just go straight Kubernetes.
And then I do a lot of my stuff with Docker Compose. Converting over from Docker Compose to like Kubernetes, what would you say be like the 1-1 for configuration?
They're drastically different. aren't
Yeah, they're drastically different, although there's a project you may be interested in called Compose with a K.
Okay.
And that's actually built by the Kubernetes SIG groups, and it will actually read your Docker Compose, and it will generate Kubernetes spec
Oh,
files.
that's scary.
And then that actually plays well into customize, which would be where you could like have like a dev customize and production and staging. So that's where customize kind of shines, is the fact is you can just take some of the other SIG groups tooling and just have it up.
So we're actually running multiple VMware servers, and then we're actually running Docker Swarm with multiple nodes across all of them, and then using Docker Compose with GitLab to do deployments across the nodes, and then using SwarmPit. Ever heard of SwarmPit? It's like it's a Docker Swarm kind of like UI interface. It kind of gives you like the AWS type of feel, so you can actually bring up and down nodes, have your repositories, and actually like take them up and down. And like right now, like the reason why I'm asking is because right now, like my boss is like, this is great and all, but Kubernetes, and I'm like, we work great. Yeah, Kubernetes. So now I'm starting research doing the conversion from Docker Swarm to Kubernetes.
If you want, like there's also another tool out there that Google built. It's called Scaffold, SKA, then the rest of the word for Scaffold. That one is, I've started to evaluate it, but it actually makes it so it's like it'll watch code and it will actually push containers, it'll build a container and then push it straight up to the Kubernetes cluster as well. And we're looking at that for kind of like a dev environment kind of thing too. But yeah, when it comes to Docker Swarm to Kubernetes, the cutover is going to be a little painful.
I don't know.
But once you have the Kubernetes spec files, that's the magic, right? And and then you can either Helm chart them or you can go to customize. That either one will work, and it just depends on how much effort you want to put into it.
Right.
So if you were a small startup, you only needed one cluster, if you would. You don't think you need, you're gonna have, you'd be likely to get 30,000 hits within 6 months of move out, right? Would you suggest starting with Kubernetes, or just suggest going over to Docker and Docker Compose? If you need an app, a database, a couple of tools to monitor that, maybe what's the certificate stuff going on in there, where would you go? Would you start at Docker, or would you start here?
I would start at Docker, because Kubernetes is going to be drastically overkill for what you need
Okay.
when you're at a startup. If you're only getting like 30,000 hits over like a 3-month period,
Yeah.
just Docker and Compose it, because you can live off 3 nodes, right?
Can you deploy Kubernetes in a simple VPS? Not going to AWS, I'm like, saving money, pinch it, cheap, go to a virtual private. You know how to do that in Docker. Well, is it as easy in Kubernetes?
I wouldn't say it's as easy, it's just another way of configuring it. It's a more verbose way of configuration, and that's why it works in enterprise very well. When you're just trying to get just a work, an MVP
All on your own.
yeah, Docker is going to definitely be the fastest.
Okay.
Because Kubernetes, you need to have multiple nodes, and it's not just one VPS, you're going to have like 2 or 3. And although it can be super lightweight with something like K3S, which is just a Go binary where you say like, hey, these 3 nodes are my control plane, and you join them all via HA, and you pick like a MySQL or Postgres backend or etcd. And then after that, you spin up more workers, right? Because that's where the workloads go. But already then, I kind of just blew it up because I was like, well, 3 control plane because I want to have downtime, and then multiple workers. You'd probably be better off just spinning up, 3 VMs.
Where are you guys hosting for Slickdeals? Where's you all Amazon?
AWS and on-prem.
Is it prem?
On-prem.
On-prem.
Like we have data center at location, and
okay.
it's hardware boxes we own.
Gotcha.
Are you going to continue to keep some things on-prem, or are you planning on moving everything to?
I don't know what management has in mind, but it would be a huge shift for us to just leave the on-prem. So we're probably going to stick on-prem for a good while longer.
Yeah.
And you're multi-zone, so you'd probably be better keeping the cloud and try to bring it on-prem.
Yeah. Also, if you want just a pretty quick, cheap way of spinning up Kubernetes, because Amazon, they're a little bit pricey. Azure, Google Cloud, same. But Linode actually has a very competitive pricing hosted Kubernetes version, so take a look at them. And also, if you listen to like pretty much any tech podcast, they are advertising through all of them right now, pretty much all of them, and they all have like a $100 code. So pick your favorite podcaster, use their code, get a free $100, and spin up Kubernetes. There you go.
Do you have a recommended distribution if you were to do Kubernetes on-prem?
RKE. Because if you want to move to where you have like a Rancher dashboard managing it, it's already there, you can just easily import. Although Rancher says they can import any Kubernetes cluster, but RKE is really easy to set up. It's just a YAML file with a list of hosts, which Kubernetes version, if you want Ingress or not, there's like a whole bunch of settings. And after that, you say RKE up, and then it will SSH onto those nodes, assuming you have SSH access, and spin up Kubernetes on Docker.
Have you guys used VMware ESX's Kubernetes support by any chance?
No, we primarily use Zen,
Okay.
so I don't have as much familiarity with VMware. Cool. And with that, folks, see you later.
So up next, we want to just do a quick, we got 30 minutes here. We just want to do a quick 15-minute demo of a product that these kids have been building that I think is kind of interesting. I got the chance to see it, and I'd love for them to kind of demo it, but I need an iPhone cable. So does anybody in here
Lightning or a C?
Just a USB to like a lightning, I think.
Oh.
What do you guys, have iPhone? Is it for iPhone, right?
I got USB-C, not A.
In order to throw it on the screen here, I'm probably gonna need,
You need USB-A or USB-C? You need USB-A or USB-C?
A.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I got C, sorry.
Yeah, I don't know the C. Unless this does it.
Do you need USB-C?
No, I need just a regular iPhone cable, just a regular USB. Because I want them to be able to cast it up here. Was there an Apple TV, did you see on here? I don't remember.
All I know is I came in here, I detached the HDMI from here.
Apple TV, your laptop is iPhone?
So, does it accept Chromecast?
I don't know if they have a Chromecast or not.
I have a Chromecast.
I don't know if that would work, if they could cast their screen to it. I think they need an Apple Play thing.
Great, that's changing.
Yeah, we could do.
What's that?
Is there a way to connect like my Mac over here?
Yeah.
Yeah, can you show it on your
Yeah, we
Chromecast?
can do that.
Yeah, let's do that then, that
Can we
works.
save some trouble?
I mean, we're software guys, there's gotta be a
We're
solution.
talking about hardware.
Just trying to understand.
On-prem.
On-prem, it's just on-premise.
On-premise, gotcha, it's a slang, I didn't understand that term.
Scalable is on-premise.
You folks are you in college now or high school still? Okay. What motivated you to start this?
I guess we kind of want to find like mentors or like internships, right? But like it was kind of hard to find, so we wanted to create something that's like more available for students to find them.
Yeah, so this is like a mentors app where if you're a mentor you can join and you get rewards on both sides, right? Like if you're a mentor or a mentee. Okay. And what would you say like a part of building this? I can see the motivation obviously because you guys are looking for mentors yourself and trying to get into the space and stuff like that. But what do you guys see as like the biggest challenge to kind of getting the app out there and gaining users and stuff like that? Have you guys thought about like how you're going to get it to the audience and how you're going to scale and things like that?
Yeah, right now one of the biggest challenges we're facing, probably like market research. We're trying to like go around and survey like students at our school, find like if they want to use our product, stuff like that.
Okay. Cool. Let me see here.
Oops,
Oh, wrong button.
oops.
Hang on.
Is that built into the TV or is it a box?
Southwest.
So Roku.
Is it built into the
There we
TV or is
go.
it a Roku box behind the TV?
Yeah.
I think it's fine.
So I guess this idea really started, we partnered with Joshua Levitt, you guys know him, right? So we partnered with him and then we were realizing we need more kids to get into tech. And we were like, well, what's the issue? What's the root of the problem, right? And we're like, so these kids are going to school. Are they learning tech there? And the schools are actually doing the opposite. We're all in high school, right? They're cutting the tech programs. Like our school, we go to a technical academy and they're cutting our web design and our IT programs. So they're getting rid of them and in place of like hospitality and nursing and all these other ones. But they're cutting the tech programs so the kids are actually it's harder for kids to get into tech in some cases, in CCSD at least. So we decided to try to create a platform to kind of just make it easier to reduce the barrier of entry for up and coming kids. So, hand it off to Ryan.
What do you want to start with?
What we do?
So this is our home screen.
Is there an internet we can connect to?
I believe so.
It isn't the fastest internet either. Yeah.
Is Cox available?
You want to just tether to the phone?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do right now.
I think that. Okay, it works. It works. It's headed this way.
So it did?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
cool.
Yeah, so basically our app has 2 users, students and mentors. So in this case, recommended mentors. So what that is like, mentors, they're able to teach students. So they can upload videos on our platform, which educates them, which educates our students. And then basically, we just go down. So it shows a list of mentors. So like, if like if you want to follow mentors, it shows what mentors you follow, and then yeah, it's pretty much it.
So we're just trying to be a matchmaking between students and mentors. So the students who necessarily aren't getting the education at CCSD or whatever school they're in, who want to go out and learn something that isn't provided by their school, we just want to make the platform so they can find the mentors, the people in industry, and just connect and ask questions and reach out and talk to them. And so we wanted to make the pipeline from not knowing anyone to not like having 0 connections to asking to meeting people, asking questions, watching videos, all the way up to projects to get stuff in your portfolio to get hired. So the first step in our pipeline was the videos, right? So here you could just watch the courses and videos, but the thing that we decided was, what if these kids have no idea what they want to do with their lives and they're lost, right? Like we're in high school, we don't know exactly what we want to do, but we have like an idea. So we kind of added this like explore tab where you could just simply go through like videos, almost like an Instagram reel or something, and you could just explore and go through different things and see, well, what interests me, right? So you can go through all these different topics and arrays and just simply swipe through and dive deeper into something that interests you.
So is this like Tinder style, swipe left, swipe right?
Yeah, yeah. And so
Kind of like if TikTok and Tinder had a beat.
yeah, yeah. So it's like, I like this, I don't like this. And so you really...
Within tech specifically?
Yes, right now we're focusing on tech.
As far as,
Yeah.
finding your path within tech.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because tech is so broad, right? Tech is anything from the local IT guy to software, it could go on, right? So we're just like, okay, cool, you want to be in tech, but what do you want to do, right? And so a lot of kids, they say, I want to be in tech. They don't know what that means, and I don't even know what that means, right? So this is the kind of the solution we came up with, which is just like a Tinder style.
You know they're in high school, they can't use Tinder, right?
Tinder style.
Yeah, TikTok, yeah. So I got a quick question. So how, like when you first sign up, does it ask you, you know, a lot of these apps when you first sign up, it's like, put your interests in, and it has like a bunch of things that it lists out. Do you guys have something like that too then?
Yeah, so when you
Like
go...
if I want to be a QA person or something versus like a programmer, right? Like
Yeah, so let me... So when you sign up, right, it will just ask you your name, and it says,
okay,
what do you want, right?
Yeah.
And then you can like say, hey, app development, cybersecurity, data analysis. And then we go one step further, we say, where are you at in this? Like,
Oh,
are you like, I kind of know app development. So like, and obviously this is just an MVP, this is very basic, but we could use this for an algorithm to be like, let's show you advanced videos and whatever, right?
yeah.
So that's what we decided to do.
At what stage right now of the product are you at?
This is just simply an MVP. We just kind of had an idea, and this is our first kind of, and we have an MVP. We're just trying to get ideas and feedback and anything.
So is this mock-ups, or can I actually use this?
You know, this is an app. We have it on TestFlight and Google's.
What is it called?
Google Apps, Google Apps.
Yeah. It's called Polaris.
Polaris.
Nice.
What was the motivation behind the name?
So Polaris is a star. It's a northern star, and people use it to guide them. So it's like, it's always facing north. So people are like, where's north? They use Polaris to guide them. So this is kind of just like, we're trying to guide you.
That's cool.
So that was the meaning behind
That's
it.
good name.
Thank you.
I like it.
So the first part of the pipeline was the videos, kind of get them, what do I want to do, and then they can dig deeper, right? And then as they watch these videos, we created a questions tab, which is very similar to like a built-in Stack Overflow almost, but within this community. So they can simply ask questions, they get upvoted, and then...
Oh, just like a forum.
Yeah, and simply just, you know, they post the question, they go, hey, I was trying to learn app development, but I had trouble, right? Or graphic design, right? And then people can comment on that and how mentors would come in and well, ideally, right, answer the question, and the students would post in, but it's not limited with any.
She's onto something now, like if you had subjects behind it, then maybe you could filter based on.
Yeah, I mean, right now we haven't really tagged it, like what it is.
Oh, okay, okay.
So I we could.
Which is, that's super helpful, but if I'm a mentor and I got a notification on my phone, like, oh, someone just asked a question for me or for my tag, right, then that encourages me as a mentor to continue engaging. So I was just curious, how it's structured right now.
So within tags, like communities, within certain tags, is that?
That's what I would think. I mean, potentially taking it a step further to give each mentor their own forum, sort of, because I imagine there are going to be a group of kids engaging with one mentor, right? But yeah, that's what I would imagine would be a good structure for it.
Okay. So this is kind of the next part of the pipeline, right? Videos, learn what you want to do, learn questions, ask, you kind of get stuck along the way. And then throughout, and then we go to projects, which is, this is where the students or mentors, whatever, they go, hey, I have this cool idea, come help, right? And this is like anyone from startups to like official, whatever, right?
And there are these student-driven projects, or
Yes,
are they mentor-driven?
This is, the idea was student-driven.
Okay.
But if a mentor had like some sort of idea, they could post it.
Sure.
But the idea behind it was students who go, okay, cool, I learned these skills and I asked a few questions, I learned the basics.
Right.
Now I want to do something with this, like I want to create a project, even like this, right? Like I want to create something.
Yeah.
So this is where they post it and they find like-minded people and kind of learn with each other.
Cool.
And then they would use their like, load it up. So then they would have a profile, right? And it would show their completed courses, what they've done throughout the app, to kind of showcase, hey, I'm qualified to be on your project. So, because kids, we don't have resumes really, like, you know, we kind of do, but it's hard to show with no work experience when you're in high school and all this. So this is kind of like their, hey, look, I'm doing things, I have a resume, it's just not maybe what the traditional resume people would think.
No, and I think in tech having a portfolio is almost more important, right? Being able to demonstrate proficiencies in projects, so yeah.
So, but yeah, we use the profiles like they're built-in resume, and we even have a review system, so like people can review mentors or whatever, be like, this mentor was good, he was bad, so just so you can kind of gauge. And it keeps people accountable, right? Like, you can't intentionally be bad because people will call you out on it. So it kind of keeps the community accountable. And then kind of what we thought was, okay, cool, we have all these ideas. It's kind of boring. So what we did is, every time you post a question, every time you comment, every time you reply, or get likes, I mean, you get points in like this gamification system. And then you can use this to just buy things in like the shop and customize your profile. And eventually we're hoping to incorporate like NFTs into this, where you can exchange your points into NFTs. Just to kind of encourage engagement throughout the app, so people are encouraged to ask questions, encouraged to reply and answer questions, all that. I think that's the main points. Any feedback?
So, of you three, who has what role in this application?
So I'm the software developer.
The software developer?
I'm the UI UX designer.
Well, I'm the everything else guy, so I don't really specialize in programming. I kind of do design, but I suck at it, so I'm like the everything else guy. So I didn't like the business card. If there's ideas, like I'm like, oh yeah, that's good, do that. And then like it's design suggestions, like
Project.
What languages are you using?
This is made using Dart and Flutter.
Okay. Are you completely both the back end and the front end?
The back end, we use services like, we use Firebase and Google Cloud. That's kind of our back end.
Right. I'm just trying to, I'm digging into the, like, your tools. I'm interested in the tool that you guys are using.
Yeah, cool. When do you folks plan on going live with iOS?
Like releasing.
Yeah, to the App Store.
I mean, we have, it's pretty much functional at this point. We ran it through a beta, like a closed beta, like we would have to give you a link to kind of get in. And we've been running that for, I think, the past month or so.
Yeah.
And we've been getting feedback all through that, and we've just kind of been, early stages bug testing, just making sure though it's not completely trash when you post it to the store. because we have to get through the review process too, right? Make sure some quality assurance. But I think we're looking at about, a month or 2 weeks or so.
Okay.
2 weeks to a month, and then the initial kind of just basics of the product.
I have a question. So is it limited to like a school, a city, or the whole world? How do you, so if the school says, I just want our people to be in here, so maybe there's a small number of people. So you have to isolate it to just that school system. How do you, what's your approach, what's your thoughts on that?
So what we originally thought was just open, anyone can help anyone, right? Because this is
Worldwide?
yeah.
Okay.
Because it was all supposed to be open like a matchmaking platform,
Okay.
connect students with mentors. But we have played with the idea of like almost like a group, right? Like this group types in this code, and then they have their close, like for example, like the homeschooling, it would only pop up with people within that system. Because I know schools are very focused on safety of the kids, right? They don't want to, like if we go sell this like as a matchmaking platform, they're gonna say no, right? But if we close it within each other and say, we're gonna have your students like talk to other students within the closed system, they'll be more likely to engage, like they'll be more open to the idea.
And the goal, of course, is to link up mentors to students who are having questions or difficulties in what they're learning.
Yeah.
Okay. Makes sense.
I'm gonna ask the business question. Have you considered how to monetize this at all? Like, have you given that any thought?
Yeah, so we like the NFTs, right? We would build smart contracts. They would buy these NFTs, right? And we would build smart contracts where every time they're traded, we would get a percentage of the transactions. And so the idea would be give points throughout engagement of the app, and then they would go to the shop to buy NFTs, and then that's where we would.
But are they buying that with their points, or are they buying it with real dollars?
With points. And then within that, they would trade it on the NFT market.
Okay.
So your calculated revenue, who is your customer, or who's your paying customer?
Right.
Is it the mentor, or is it the mentee?
So the mentees, obviously students, right? They don't have money, but this is more of a long term. Like we won't see money up front. This is more when the mentees, right, kind of go through and start using the platform, do the NFTs long term. We're thinking that would keep this thing alive.
Absolutely. Advertising could almost be
Uh,
a way too, because there's Udemy and other places that probably want to attract people who are interested in those, whatever. Right?
Totally, or I could totally see programs with like corporate sponsors, like maybe 3 or 4 people at a company, right? But the company pays for that sponsorship, and 3 or 4 people or however many to be a mentor.
Potential talent or
Sure.
something.
Right.
I think it's awesome. I think it's really cool.
Yeah, no, it's super.
And I really like that explore feature too for people that are like, I think I'm kind of interested, but it can be super intimidating if you're not just nerding out all the time or whatever, right? And it's like, oh cool, like swipe left, swipe right. I'm sure there are like flow charts that exist, right, that could get people to places and stuff. Like I think it's really cool.
Would this tend to be public or private in the group range? With the communication between the mentors and the mentees, like the questions and all that stuff, would that be public to everyone else in the platform, or would it be only public to the mentor and their direct
Yeah, that was
relationship?
kind of the question I was asking.
So the questions in the projects and all that stuff, and the comments, those are all public. But then we also have appointments in which you can then go to these mentors' pages and then schedule an appointment to meet on them, like one-on-one, like through a Zoom link or whatever, right? There's just built-in like scheduling. And then we also have a private message feature, which you could then reach out. Like if you don't want to publicly post a question, you could reach out to any mentor you see on the app, and then reach out through their direct message.
Because I can see the potential where, and I think of it like in some of the software repositories on the internet, it's free, but it's public. But if you want it to be private, when your group's private, then of course you have to pay. But the mentor pay to basically have privacy all around just for the group. And, it's a pathway to revenue,
So what's one thing right now that you guys need that would dramatically move this forward faster?
Right now we're just trying to figure out, like, we have the idea, we have the kind of basic, we're just trying to figure out if people actually want this. Is this a good idea?
Getting some users, seeing how it goes.
Yeah.
Like, okay.
So we're just at the stage.
What have you seen so far with your peer group? Like,
Yeah, so we've given the beta to about 20 of the students at our school, and we've seen that they gravitate really towards the shop aspect and the explore screen. Those are kind of where they gravitate towards because I think it's familiar to them, and they really like the gamifications. For example, the goals, right? We added like an achievement system, and when you post 10 questions, like you'll get points, and it's like a whole gamification of it, and it kind of brings them back. Like they're like, okay, cool, I'm at 9 out of 10 questions posted. Let me just post one more that I maybe wouldn't have posted otherwise, but I want to get the achievement or whatever.
It has to be kind of fun to start sucking them in a little bit. Right?
Yeah, because they don't. I mean, there's kind of a negative connotation to like any learning software or whatever. So when you kind of focus on the gaming aspects and the Explore tab is like almost like a social media platform.
That's a great idea though, because then I think like from that standpoint, then people want to try and ask smarter questions, right? And that ends up helping the community because then you get better questions and everybody's learning from it, right? So.
Have you used Twitch by any chance?
Twitch?
You know how, okay, so when you sign up for Twitch, they have these whole levels of achievements that actually go up before you become a affiliate or partner. That's what I kind of like see like a lot of that is like, it engages them to use more features to get achievements.
So to unlock certain parts of the app.
Right.
Okay. Like a Stack Overflow or stuff.
Yeah.
To do anything pretty much you need.
You need to engage. Yeah.
Any idea, any plan to go like desktop version of that? Because IT, you know, a lot of things if you plan to do like pair programming, if you're a mentor or something like that, is beyond app.
Yeah, so this is just a MVP mobile, so it's on Android and Apple. But we definitely thought a lot of a website version where they could just reach through it through a desktop, just to engage. But we're using Flutter, which is cross-platform through many things, so it wouldn't be that difficult. It'd just be a UI change.
Does Flutter have an HTML output? Can you output to a website?
Yeah, it does do web.
Okay.
Do you have some kind of vetting process in mind for the mentors who join the platform? Because I can hear the alarm bells going off in parents' heads. Like, my kid is talking to this adult on this app, and like, what? Like, what are you talking about? Do you plan on meeting this person? Like, so like, have you thought about that? And where are you at with
Yeah,
that?
so we thought like a lot about it. Like obviously the lower barrier to entry, the more mentors we're gonna get, but the more that would also on the other side of that means the less quality we're gonna get. So and that's kind of part of the question we've been asking people, like how do you guys think it should be done? Because we're not even 100% sure. Like how much vetting should we do? Like if we should do vetting, I mean, do you have it?
I think you'll have a hard time getting people to jump on board if there's no vetting at all, for sure. Because I mean, you're talking about linking adults with kids.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of safety issues that play into that, and so I think you're going to want to get feedback from parents, from school administrators, teachers, about that particular subject, for sure.
Okay. Thank you.
On that same question, why would you ever have anything private? There's no need. Everything here should be absolutely public and above board. You guys, what do you think?
I disagree with that,
Really?
especially when you're dealing with children. You should probably have the conversation with children and adults private, outside of the spectrum of if I'm a random person going on the internet and harvesting data. I wouldn't want to have my child's information public.
No, but I'm saying, I'm stuck on this problem. How do I fix, x equals 7728?
Right.
And that the answer is, well, the mentor says, you know what? Why don't you try this little technique? Above board, there's nothing.
No, I mean, within the group, I'm okay with. I'm gonna say like, if I'm in California and I'm using this app with my mentor, if somebody in New York who's using this app should not see my information. I don't think that's a safe thing for children.
I'm thinking about Stack Overflow. I'm thinking about it's a technically oriented app to help people learn stuff. And when you help people learn stuff, there's nothing that should be hidden. If you go to parents and say, I'm just asking, I'm like asking a question, why don't you have anything private anywhere anyway? Just get rid of the privacy thing and you get out of this problem with parents.
You may want to anonymize usernames or something and not show location and do things like that protect the child. And also with mentors, like have some sort of screening process where maybe it's a Zoom call that you have for 50 minutes to see that they're actually not some weirdo or something that needs to be publicly executed, But I think it's a great idea. We gotta wrap it up here, but I will say, next month at Tech Alley, we're gonna actually more dedicated to demo time. So I'd love to see where you guys are at then again. And if anybody has a startup or a pet project they'd love to pitch to, we'll have time for a couple of them. So, and then we'll also have a separate meetup for PHP Vegas / Vegas Programmers Meetup, whatever all that is. But I really appreciate you guys are on a great track. I think that you guys are gonna kill it. I mean, post it when you get it on the App Store. You know, throw it on Reddit. I'm sure there's a lot of like, you know, teens and other guys in your girls in that realm that want to learn, and this is a great way, I think. So keep it up.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, let's give away the prizes and then we're gonna split. We just have two prizes. We have the 1-year JetBrains license and the 1-month Symphony Cast membership. So if you here is interested in either of those prizes, raise your hand and I'll give you a number. We got one person. Anybody else interested? Maybe an auto win all of it.
You guys want to use JetBrains?
Symphony Cast or JetBrains license, an IDE license? No? Okay. Well.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
All right, thank you everybody for coming out. We'll see you at the next one.
You know Matt was on.
I'm taking up more space in it.
His name sounds very
He's a programmer that works at Slickdeals. I wonder if you I'm sure with him. Oh yeah.